intelligencesquared.com.
Thanks very much, Kwasi, and thanks to all the speakers for their eloquence and also for keeping within the 8 to 9 minutes. We're going to come to you in a moment, but I first of all just want to give you the preliminary result. This is from your preferences expressed as you came in, that for the motion we have 191, and against the motion 68. And you might think that that was a pretty gloomy outlook for one side of the panel, until I tell you that we have the don't knows at 136. So the don't knows are all there to play for, as well as the chance of persuading people to switch sides. And you'll be voting again at the end of our Q&A. So I'd like you to, I can't see very well from here, with or without my glasses, because it's very bright up here, and that's getting better. So please wave your hands in the air energetically if you've got a point you want to make, and I'll try and get in as many as possible. Microphones will come to you in due course. And I can see one gentleman there in the very middle of the middle row in a white shirt, I think, of microphone. But while the microphone's making his way to him, let's just have a quick straw poll. Hands up who in the audience would count themselves as being from the colonies. That includes America. And hands up who doesn't count themselves as being from the colonies. Okay, hands up that don't knows. That's very encouraging. Everyone here knows where they come from. Okay, gentlemen, have you got your microphone? Go ahead, make your intervention, please.
Thank you. The opposition said they weren't going to play the blame game, but I think, to be honest, they did, especially the first two speakers. And I think the agency argument advanced by the proposition is very powerful. The opposition seem to have an odd conception of history. It's one that starts with empire and runs to today, and it says, well, some bad things happened after the empire, so the empire must have caused them, which sort of confuses correlation with causation on quite an epic scale, I think. A lot of the tribal conflicts happened after empire, yes, but a lot of them happened before empire too. Empire didn't necessarily cause them. I think it was right that we should flag up that there are some very specific structural problems, like specifically Kashmir and Palestine, that were caused by the empire. But they're definitely the exception rather than the rule. And I suppose I would end with this charge to the opposition, which is the radically divergent experiences of former colonies show that surely the empire is not a determining factor in the ills that a country has had. I mean, we've all been colonies at some point, and we've all developed. I mean, a good example is perhaps China. China was taken apart by lots of empires, and of course we all know about the rise of China. Yeah, I'll repeat my point.
Thanks very much.
We've all had different experiences, and this shows that the empire can't have been a determining factor.
Excellent point. Thank you very much indeed. Now the gentleman down there. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Tony Goodwin, Antal International. I wanted to take up on Kwasi's point about the word blame, and I think a lot of the problems that the former colonies are going through about blame can be related back to how successful Germany and Japan were post-Second World War by not blaming their predicament or their economic collapse on what had gone before. And therefore, if the colonies stop blaming and start getting on with changing their circumstance and concentrating on today, surely that's going to put them in a much better position than if they keep looking back on the past and they keep worrying about what happened 50 years ago.
Thanks very much. Got we've had two good points for that side, and then so the gentleman in the third row, I think. Yes, that's right. Go ahead, sir. We'll take your question.
Thank you. Could the panelists discuss the contrast the British Empire to other empires, such as the French Empire or the Portuguese Empire, and particularly in the point of the level of engagement post-independence? So the level of engagement of the French in Africa was much more. Could the panelists discuss the relative success or failure of those empires? Thank you.
Excellent. Right, we'll take those three, and I think perhaps we might start. I'm going to fire this one at Richard Gott for a start. I think would be a good point for you to respond to. Perhaps this radical divergence between the different fortunes of different countries suggests that empire may be a coincident factor, but perhaps not a determining one. Do you want to have a crack at that?
This is a question that people ask all the time. Can you compare the experiences of the different European empires? And I tend to argue that they're all much the same and that they all exhibited very similar characteristics. But I think it is true that in the period, post-colonial period, the French diverged, and they were infinitely more active than the British, for example, in their neo-colonial ways of effectively running their ex-colonies. The British were rather more undercover about the way they did it. But then, if you think of the Dutch, I mean, they decolonized not all that well in some parts of the world, but they haven't had the problems that we have had. And I think the Indonesians today don't blame the Dutch for their colonial experience.
Is there anyone from Indonesia in the audience who'd like to give a view on that? Don't be shy. Dita, would you like to respond from the other side to those three interesting questions?
Okay. I would say that I agree with Richard that empires more or less ran their colonies in the same way. And this, again, you could look at public expenditures. And if we look at, and I've analyzed French public expenditures in Indochina, Algeria, and Chad, and compared them against the same sorts of figures I gave you for the British Empire, and more or less the same outcome. I mean, even though some people have said the French prioritized education, for example, the spending is around the same. Up until the Second World War, it's 4 to 10% on social welfare spending, and that includes education, and most of that spending was on French families abroad, not on the indigenous populations per se. What this tells me is if all of them are spending most of their money on the externally oriented transport infrastructure, which is the bulwark of global trade and global capitalism, then this is exactly what I was saying. And I'd like to use this opportunity to also respond to something that Kwasi said when he talked about the British imperial experience and legacy. Of course is remembered in the different colonies. Yes, of course it is. In the same way, and I'm going to take Ramachandra's point about St. Thomas. St. Thomas went to India and he spread Christianity. He was an apostle for Christianity. There is a famous shrine to him called St. Thomas Mount in Chennai, where I'm from. And in that shrine, when you walk up these steps built into the mountain, you don't worship St. Thomas, you worship Christ. And people remember who St. Thomas was, and there's a monument to him in the form of this St. Thomas Mount, in the same way that there are monuments to Britain in the former colonies. But Britain itself isn't the enduring force here. It is global capitalism. Britain is no longer the head of global capitalism. The US seems to be regarded as the head. Hence, blame has shifted.
Thanks very much. Do please wave your hands around so I can get an idea of how many. Yeah, very briefly, if you just wanted to just actually respond to that, then we're going to take some more questions.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to the first question that was asked. We haven't really addressed that yet. We mustn't use agency as a get-out-of-jail-free card here. There is a direct continuum that you can chart from the pre-colonial period, throughout the colonial period, into the post-colonial period, and to today, of creating mass global inequalities, the manipulation of identities, polities, and economies. Colonial rule so massively queered the pitch for so many people in so many different countries that it has to still be seen as very important in trying to work out what's going on today. Yes, of course, within each territory there were different sectors of society. Some did well, some didn't do so well, some were killed, and all the rest of it. But we really have to see the creation of an international system based upon equality and injustice.
Right. I mean, that's very much our point, which is that the colonial system should only be regarded as one element in a much broader continuum, one element in a much broader history. So there's no point focusing all your blame on one particular historical episode when there are these deeper historical rhythms and traditions which are going to affect the trajectory of these histories.
Right, this is indeed a debate, but it's a debate with rules. And I'm just going to... Everybody's going to have a chance to respond at the end, so save your fire. Let's give the audience their chance. Let's have the gentleman over there. Yes, go ahead, sir.
From the well-off former colonies like the United States and Australia to the two former colonies like India and Bangladesh, which are economically not so well-off but are growing, why is it that I do not come across in the substantial output in the media, radio, television, and print, the words British imperialism or British Empire, as much as I come across those words here in the UK? Is it just me, or am I right in thinking that this is partly Ramachandra Guha's point actually, that like the English cricket team, the British Empire plays well only at home, and no longer in the colonies?
Very interesting. Okay, I'm going to take a whole bunch more questions. There was another chat there. Go ahead, ma'am. Yes, there, please.
Hello, I'm not a man.
No, sorry, I can't see from here.
That's okay.
I said ma'am, actually.
Oh, sorry. So my point really, and it ends up as a question, is really about the actual topic of the debate, and it's a general point about my problem with the word should. So, you know, should Britain's former colonies stop blaming empire for their ills? When, to contextualize the question that's coming up, I think that can they? Yes, definitely blame them in my view, but does it help? Should they continue to? And really, what is there to be achieved by their continuing to blame? And the question actually goes to the people that I support, which is the against panel.
Thanks very much. Okay, let's have some more. There's a white shirt. Keep your hand up, sir, so the chap with the microphone can see you.
Hello. Hi. I'm probably the only person here from Kashmir, and I actually take exception at the last speaker's point about Kashmir. Kashmiris don't blame the British for what has happened there. They are merely victims of conflicting ideologies between India and Pakistan, whereas Pakistan, with its insecure military leadership, has taken on the mantle of protecting the subcontinent's Muslims on one hand, and the Indians are insecure and want Kashmir as a showcase for their secularism. When they already when the population of Kashmir is only 10 million, and the number of Muslims living in India run into about 170 million. I don't know how this 10 million somehow showcases anything. But Kashmir has, and the other point where the last speaker misled was in terms of the historical facts about the accession of Kashmir to India. The Maharaja didn't...
Yes, just briefly, please, because we've got a lot to get through.
Well, all I'm trying to say is that there was an active aggression from Pakistan in the region which caused this.
Very good. I'm going to come to Kwasi in a moment, but I just want to be fair. Is there anybody else from Kashmir here who would like to... very good. You are indeed the only self-defining Kashmiri here. Okay, I'm going to take Kwasi. Do you want to reply to that?
As a historic, the act of aggression, and I've looked at some of the documents relating to this, happened in October of '47. And the accession, India became independent in August of that year. And the Maharaja had decided, roughly at the time of the Indian independence. More broadly, and we can debate about that, I'm quite happy to have a conversation about this later. I think the point we're trying to make is that not everything can be blamed on empire. These countries wouldn't have been lands of milk and honey, but there are certain structural things that they can blame empire for. It's a very simple point. So I can blame the train for my being late to work, but also the fact that I got up late was also a contributing factor. But that doesn't negate, neither of them negates each other, if you see what I mean.
Thanks very much. Ramachandra.
Yeah, I'm glad that the gentleman spoke on Kashmir. Before I come to the substantive point, on the factual thing, I regret to say that the amateur is right and the scholar is wrong. There were several weeks that preceded the rebellion, the invasion from the northwest frontier started several weeks before the Maharaja acceded. No, you could read my book, many other books on that, but that's not the point. The point is, this is not to defend the Maharaja, this is to absolve the British of blame. And that's my point. He quite rightly said, you say that the Kashmiris blame the British, but if you travel in Kashmir and you talk to people, they blame the Indians and the Pakistanis, both of whom have behaved despicably. The Indians have rigged elections, the Pakistanis have sent jihadis, and Sheikh Abdullah, the great Kashmiri leader, once said, Kashmir is like a beautiful damsel coveted by two avaricious men. And the two men he named, neither were British. There was India and Pakistan.
Right. I commend to the organisers a debate sometime, perhaps in 2012 or 2013, on Kashmir, where we can really get to grips with this. But I would now like to say no more Kashmir, please. It's a very wide canvas we have to paint on. It would be a pity just to paint a cameo. There's a gentleman at the back, the very back. Let's have a microphone to him, and then someone at the very front. So, yes, sir, can you keep your hand up? Yes. He's over there. Start with the one at the very front, because he's got it close to the microphone. Then I'll go to you, sir, at the back.
Yes. Hello, thank you. This is a question for the against. I think only Richard Gott told us what he thought the purpose of blame was, and that was to get reparations. Would they agree that one of the most successful transitions that we've seen in recent years has been South Africa's transition, and that used a process of truth and reconciliation rather than blame? So could you speak to the question of the social and historical purpose of blame as opposed to truth?
Excellent. Now, we've only got about 6 minutes before we go into the final speeches. So to be fair, I'm just going to carry on taking questions right up to 8:15, and then all the points that have been made can be answered from the panel. So let's go ahead, sir. Yes.
Could I just point out that there's absolutely no point in people blaming this country for the release of its empire, because the fact is that the country after World War II just could not afford to run an empire. At the end of World War II, the national debt of this country was over 250% of GDP.
Yes,
we're grumbling today that Greece has got 180%. It's all very cheap to have a commonwealth which we can run and assist with, but there would have been no point in retaining an empire which we could not have afforded to maintain.
Yes.
They have the wealth and the expertise after 50 or more years of British rule to do it themselves.
Well, thank you very much, sir. And anyone who thinks the British Empire should have continued a lot longer is welcome to see you afterwards to debate that. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead. I'm going to work my way forward to the front and then stop on the dot 8:15. So brief comments, please.
Very briefly, just to pick up on Richard's point on reparations, I think that issue has touched the heart of the title, because the former colonies have been dubbed members of the developing world. And without economic empowerment, I do not think that we can bury the issue, particularly for countries in the Caribbean, which are small island states, and as a consequence of slavery and colonization, we do suffer, economically. So I think that Richard's point that there is a valid case for reparations hits the nail on the head and ought to be expanded on.
Can you just tell us which country you come from, ma'am?
Jamaica.
Thank you very much. Go ahead. Let's keep on going down. Go on.
Surely when we're talking about the former colonies, we actually need to be much more specific, and we need to recognise maybe that there's actually a spectrum. I think maybe the Indian example is one, but it doesn't really translate to the sub-Saharan Africa one, especially in East Africa, and maybe it's different in India, but in East African newspapers today, most of the articles about economic development also always refer back to the colonial legacy. Like, surely we can't just sit around making generalizations about this. We have to understand
thanks so much.
The former colonies had different experiences.
The motion doesn't say all Britain's former colonies should stop blaming the empire. It doesn't say at least one. It just says Britain's former colonies. So you have to, I think, accept that the concept is a generality. Yes, go ahead. Someone.
If being part of the empire was such a negative experience, why is the Commonwealth organisation still flourishing?
Very good. That's a nice, short, sharp question to that side. Go ahead, sir. Yep, we're going to have to crack on. So short questions, please.
Richard Gott's attempt to link Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, I think is a complete absurdity. Ramachandra, however, has made the key insight that the ills of the ex-empire are down to what the ex-governor of the Bank of Nigeria referred to also as the AIDS of modern society, which is corruption. It is corruption that is causing the ills.
Thanks very much. Okay, we've got time for 2 or 3 more. Yes, go ahead.
Tristram, at the outset of his speech, reassured us that neither he nor any of his colleagues need reminding of the wrongdoings of empires or their builders. And it's also been pointed out that both he and Kwasi voted for the recent Libyan intervention.
No, that was one of a number of historical errors on the heart. I was actually at the birth of my 3rd son when that vote was taking place. I think it points to a broader issue about the rather haphazard approach to the truth.
Okay, that was a point of information, but
accepting that and accepting the peculiar nature of the Libyan intervention, would Tristram have made the same assertion in 2001, or were the spades with which empire was buried only got out in May 2010?
Very good. Okay, we've got time for 2 more, so wave vigorously if you want to be... yes, go. There's a lady there just behind you with blonde hair.
So I just have a brief comment to make about the white colonies and my points in support of the against motion. Maori and Aboriginal are at the lowest socioeconomic, category of any measure in Australia and New Zealand, and that's a direct result of British colonisation and imposing a society and a structure on them that they weren't used to. So, as other people have pointed out, there's a wide variety and a wide spectrum, but I think that's a point in favour of the against motion.
Thanks very much indeed. And there's a gentleman down here at the very front with his hand up. We can squeeze you in, sir.
Good evening. What similarities, if any, do you see with foreign direct investment made from countries such as China and Saudi Arabia in Africa today, with investments made by former European empires of yesteryear? And how do you think historians in time to come will judge that?
That's a very good question. I think possibly we've got a time travel question here, because that really belongs in next debate, which is beware of the dragon. Africa should not look to China, but it's a jolly good one. I think